It's KBKW's Coffee Talk at 7:37, and Stephen Arms is with us, and of course it's Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And you know what's interesting is when I was in Worms, the church where Martin Luther went as a child was in that town, the Catholic church there. Statues of Martin Luther everywhere.
Yeah, you're talking about history. For those who are historian, not history, he's talking about the Protestant Reform.
Right.
And one of the reasons we ended
that
with
Martin Luther King is Jr. was named after. Yeah.
Namesake. Yeah, and again, one of the main reasons, a massive reform that gave us the Christianity as we have it today. Because I mean, if not, it was pretty much the church at that point. It was only the Catholic Church as we would understand it.
And the indulgences is one of the things
that was a big issue.
Yeah, you could buy your way into heaven,
Well, if it was very common that what happened is a nobleman or a rich person would die, and then the family would make a massive donation to a monastery, and the monks in the monastery every day would say a prayer for the soul of that person who would, so that they would eventually work their way from purgatory into heaven. Every prayer had a little bit of a value, and then you could slowly work it through. It's kind of like the idea of a prayer drum. Rather than actually praying, you beat your little prayer drum, and everyone counts as a prayer. So it's the kind of the internet version, the accelerated version of now they would just run logarithms, and you could get to heaven immediately, I guess. I was thinking today that since it is Martin Luther King's the birthday, I mean the day we honor him, I brought some of his words with me. And there's a section of his speech that most people are familiar with, parts of it, but I thought I'd like to read a little bit from his I Have a Dream speech. This is, of course, in August 28th, 1963, at the Lincoln Memorial. Have you ever been to the Lincoln Memorial?
No.
It's a fascinating place. There's a real solemnness and almost a holiness to it. Because people realize, that I think, there's been other things that honor, Civil War veterans. Obviously, Gettysburg feels like that, but you kind of feel the weight of the Civil War there. So I thought it was an excellent place when he spoke. But I'm going to read a little, if you don't mind. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you today, my friends, so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day the nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of the creed. We hold these truths self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day in the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that even in the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering in the heat of injustice, sweltering in the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of paradise and justice. I have a dream that for my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And I've always thought that's the section I thought most people are familiar with.
Yes.
They like the one line in the end, but I thought the lead-in in the other gives you some ideas of what you're actually looking at, because, again, this is 1963. This is for the Civil Acts Reform Act. This is before the abolishment of the poll tax, which poll taxes were taxes you had to pay when you went to go vote. And they were specifically designed in southern areas to keep the blacks from being able to vote. They also affected the poor white folks, too, there.
So how much was a poll tax? I mean,
it varied from state to state and county to some degrees, but it was always meant to be. It's like the idea also during the time the South in the 50s and sometimes 60s did literacy tests. They required that you be able to prove that you could read to be able to vote. And of course, if a white man walked up, he'd be given a Captain Marvel comic, and if a black man walked up, he'd be given like Don Quixote. Or something that was hard.
A medical journal.
A medical journal or something that's difficult to read. And I do. So I mean, this is again. So the transformations when you look at it from the 1963, to 2003 to 2013 to now. I mean, the amount of change in that period of time has been actually extraordinary. I mean, you haven't had this much change in the rights in dealings with matters of civil rights since the end of the Civil War, to the abolishment of slavery. So I mean, it's just it always amazes me how sometimes people look at it and they're impatient, and I go, but from a historian's point of view, especially, we're talking about You and I were both around during that time. So we're talking about a generation. In a generation, you've went from poll taxes, and you've went from, segregation, separate but equal, to, again, a black president of the United States. I mean, that strikes me as an amazing transformation in a relatively small period of time. And I think most people have everyone does have prejudice. That's fine. That part of human nature is something being afraid of things that are different. But I always saw a different line between prejudice and bigotry. Bigotry is the idea when I show you, when you actually spend time with a person one of these people you find uncomfortable, and if you can't find common ground with them, then you may want to think about whether you're being fair to them, whether you're being a bigot. I think most people find if you spend time with people, you'll find out that there's almost no difference between us. If you take off the first two layers of our skin, it sounds kind of gross, but if you do, all of our pigment is in the first two layers of our skin. We're all kind of salmon colored after that. And you almost have to be a forensic pathologist to be able to tell what race people are. And we're talking about, a few centimeters of tissue making the difference between one person and another. When you look at it, it's ridiculous. We all come from a common stock. We're all human beings. We have one race, the human race. We're all Homo sapiens.
Now, I think the only way you're ever going to totally bring everybody together on Earth is if there's some sort of threat or a thought of a threat from another group of beings that don't live here. So people will look at themselves as Earthlings as opposed to breaking it down into what country they live in or what political party they're a member of.
And true, and I'd agree with that. I think it would be, you want to talk about a major change in history, just the fact if you ever actually find out there is intelligent life anywhere else in the world.
You mean in the universe?
I'm sorry. I guess that's a Freudian slip, isn't it? Is there intelligent life on Earth would be the argument. But on another planet, that alone would change all form of structure. Religions structure would change. It would be the most significant change probably.
Now, do you think then that the government has covered up things? I mean, you have astronauts that have flown, and I think Gene Cernan was one of them, and I think Neil Armstrong another. But anyway, where there were objects that seemed to be following him, and things that they saw that the government probably was aware of, and the Russians have said for a long time, that they've seen these things or had things happen or whatever. But nowadays, they don't need to land here, and plus it might not be all that safe.
So you're basically asking, do I believe UFOs? I believe in UFO because UFO means unidentified flying object. If you see something you don't know what it is, then guess what? It's a UFO. But if you're talking about it's an interesting question. And when you look at the universe in general, look at our galaxy. Our galaxy, let's assume for the sake of argument that our type of star, a yellow star, a type G star, is a good one for life. Okay, well there's about 3 billion of those in this galaxy. So every solar system that has one of those, in theory, might be able to have. Again, it has to have a planet with water and a bunch of other things too. Could have life. The issue is, I think that life probably exists in the universe. Now, whether we're talking about intelligent life, for all I know, the universe is 18 billion years old. I mean, there could have been intelligent life that has risen and fallen all over the universe, and we have no idea. The issue is, can you get past the speed of light? If you can't get past the speed of light, which is, of course, Einstein's theory of relativity equals mc squared, energy times speed of light squared. E is energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. If you can't get past that, then how would you know whether they're even here? I mean, for all you know, 150,000 light years from here, there could be a vast civilization, they may travel all around their solar system. But unless you can go faster than light, how are you ever going to know they're there?
Yeah, they think the only time that anything moves faster is during the initial, and people say, well, because they can go back and they know there was an explosion of some sort.
The original Big Bang.
Yeah, the Big Bang. But then again, that fits in with the way nature is, because what's a tree start with? A tiny seed. What do we start with? A cell, and then it expands from there. They said the velocity that of the explosion had to exceed several times the speed of light to get the spread and the way that the universe is expanding.
And I've heard that also, that it is the case. And there are some theories on, tachyons or particles that in theory that exist and move faster than the speed of light. There may be methods around it that, But I'd like to
wormholes.
I just think that if you can get around the distance, is there life in the universe? I don't have any proof of it, but the mathematical odds tell me there has to be life. Now, again, is it intelligent life? I still think it's probably too much of a universe there not to be intelligent life. Does it have enough? Does it have warp drive technology and can come and visit us? That's when I'm not willing to go that far yet. But I do think there are a lot of inconsistencies when people saying with all the UFOs we've had that have been seen by pilots, that have been seen by professionals. Yeah. It makes you wonder, if they saw something and they didn't know what it was, well, then what did they see? Is it explainable by other phenomenon? Possibly, but what if only 0.5% isn't? Okay, well then give me 1,000 UFO sightings at 0.5%. Okay, now we end up with 5 or 6 that you can't explain. Well, then what are those?
Another thing that could be is what we're already doing. Well, China just did it on the moon. We're doing it on Mars and everything else. Why we're landing stuff that's driving around. No, there's no intelligent life there, just machines.
Right, exactly. And that's something the idea. You could send a machine slower than the speed of light, and once it got here, it could look around and do whatever it's going to do. And we do that ourselves. Our Voyager is getting near the Oort cloud, which is the edges of our galaxy now. Our solar system. So anyway, a very interesting idea. I'm not sure. I don't have a definitive answer because we're into the speculation.
But I can see why you'd want to cover those things up because just like you were saying,
again, it would be tremendous.
Yes.
What is the art? If you suddenly find out there's intelligent life on another planet, then did Jesus come to that world? Does Muhammad's word work if you're having to deal with you're dealing with Alpha Centaurians? Religion would be a huge part.
I think it could fit in though to the storyline. I mean, because if God made the universe, He can do whatever He wants with it.
Well, see, and that's the argument why you can't. Yeah. In reality, an atheist can never win an argument with a faithful person because if you have an infinite God, then I can change all the variables. So any logical argument you give me.
But see, atheism is a sense of religion, is a form of religion.
It's a very much in that way. I don't have the faith to be an atheist. Because it takes real faith to believe in nothing whatsoever. That's pretty. I got to admit, I could admire somebody who's saying, "I'll stand in the darkness and just scream." It's what they're talking about. I like to believe that. I believe personally, in my opinion, human beings have souls. But I think of myself as a spiritual man, but I'm not a religious man, not an organized.
But you sense that.
I do. I have had people die. I've been treating when I was an ambulance driver, and I've seen the light go out of people's eyes. And I've seen people been revived, and I've actually revived people when I was driving ambulance who were dead and have been brought back by CPR. And there definitely is something to that. It seems more than just the physical that we're talking about.
Yeah, and then hauntings and things like that they've had some evidence of. And
do you believe in ghosts? And the answer is I don't close my minds to it. I'll default back to Hamlet and Shakespeare that there are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, or they're dreamed of in your philosophies. The wisest I think words some of the wisest words of human history are I don't know, and that gives you the ability to define. If you don't have the I don't know, you never accomplish anything. You'll never move beyond what's just in front of you. And again, you wouldn't have airplanes, you wouldn't have computers, you wouldn't have electricity if you didn't have someone that
wouldn't have smartphones. You wouldn't have Alexa.
We won't get. Now we're going about maybe talking about curses as well as benefits, right? But that's another matter.
We should take a quick. It's KBKW's Coffee Talk. It is 7:52, and by the way, coming up in the next hour, we're going to have John Barkley with us and his son Chris, and then Stephen Friedrich, formerly of the Daily World, and we're going to talk about a youth academy, and it's a military academy, and Chris is just back from that, so we're going to kind of find out more about that.
So now that we've answered the philosophical questions of life on other planets, I did bring some other words of Dr. King with me. I thought about reading a few more of his quotes that I went through. You can find, of course, volumes on him, but these ones are particularly that I read, and I said they were moving to me. Faith is taking the first step, even when you don't see the whole staircase. Again, that's the idea we're talking about. The idea of it's the idea of I don't know. It's taking a chance. It's moving on from there. One of his ones I thought in modern times is probably would speak to the black community is, no work is insignificant. All labor that uplifts humanity has dignity and importance and should be undertaken with painstaking excellence.
And you find a lot of people that are in all sorts of jobs that do they do it the best they can.
It doesn't matter. There's nothing wrong with honest labor.
No.
There isn't at all. I mean, it is, there's the idea, people have lost the idea that service is its own reward, doing a good job, the work ethic. It's not, and that's just, our communities in general have a little bit of problem with that. In some of our things we're talking about with millennials, do they actually have good work ethics? Some do and some don't. I think it depends on their upbringing, but there's never anything wrong with, I've done some pretty grungy, dirty, hard work in my life. I've worked on loading docks, and I've cleaned houses, and I've, janitorial work and things like that. I mean, nothing compared to some of the most horrible job. I'm not like a coal miner or something like that. But, there's nothing wrong with doing hard labor or doing work as long as, you can take the reward from it. And as long as you can make a decent living at it. Let's see. Another quote of his is that, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends.
That says a lot.
That does say a lot. And that exactly, because, your enemies will always be willing to speak up about you. But then, how many people are willing to stand up for what's right? How many people are willing to stand with you? So like I said, why the one things I particularly like about Dr. King is that, that he not only was a civil rights movement and all the things he did, which were great accomplishments, but that he was obviously a man who had wisdom in addition to having intelligence and drive. And I think it's a great his death was a great tragedy, because I do believe that we have problems with racial relations in the United States still. It's not perfect. I think it's moved on tremendously, but I often wonder how much even better it would have been if Dr. King had survived. If he would have been that civil rights leader all through the 70s and the 80s. He could have.
Now, the assassin did Earl Ray.
James Earl Ray.
James Earl Ray. Was he on an assignment to do that, or was that his own?
You can start playing conspiracy theories on it, but the indications are that James Earl Ray just didn't like him because it was more of an issue of sheerly just prejudice. We could get in, I've heard conspiracy theories about FBI and all this type of stuff. And I know that J. Edgar Hoover did have a file on Martin Luther King.
He had a file on everybody.
Yeah, but I said that's, like saying, like congratulations, the FBI needs to be.
He had one on the Beatles, for God's sake.
I think the FBI probably needs to be, its upper echelon probably needs to be fired and rehired and needs to be reorganized entirely. I think it has strayed so far off of its original purposes.
You mean just recently? You mean?
Well, I'll go from I can go from the 70s on. I mean, it does look like it seems to. The problem with people in those positions is they're not elected and they accumulate power, and it just accumulate. I mean, some of the things. I mean, I think it mishandled stuff during the Clinton situation in his impeachment. It was mishandled during Bush. It's been mishandled currently.
Well, then you had J. Edgar Hoover. That was. Not the most.
Oh no! And again, like I said, if you use Hoover as an example, it hasn't really gotten better since Hoover. It's just gotten quieter and more about it. I think probably the Department of Justice needs to reorganize it at some point and actually do a house cleaning on it, because I don't have any problem at all with the field agents, but it seems like whenever you have administrators that don't leave, they accrue power and they're more interested in keeping their power than doing their job. And I'm not so sure they're acting in the best interest of the United States at this point. That is just pure opinion.
Mm-hmm. Right. Gotcha.
So let's see. Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? Again, Mahatma Gandhi has a quote almost exactly like that. Dr. King was a person who actually was in favor of Mahatma Gandhi. Also, this is the last one here I really like. Our lives begin the day we become silent about the things that matter. And I think that's a good quote for today, that when you stop talking about things that matter, and these days with the social media aspects we have, with the mob mentality that will rear up on places like, the Instagram and Twitter and any of these various places, but somebody will say something and suddenly you'll have a mob, and generally it's a mob of the same individuals over and over again, I'm of the opinion, who will rear up and push down, because If you're not willing to talk about things that matter, then you're not willing to have speech. And if you don't have free speech, again, you don't have a country. You don't have the United States of America unless you let people.
But somebody nowadays could say that free speech is run amok because some of this speech is coming from all these different sources, and there's a lot of prejudice. There's a lot of misinformation. And so pretty soon everybody thinks everything's fake.
Well, what you need to, that's the point about it is that listen to all the different speech. I've been of the opinion every time I've heard a person speak on topics that say racism or whatever, you've got some white supremacists out, letting them talk is easy way to prove that they're an idiot. Because if you listen to what they say, then all you have to go is you're an idiot. It does, it's inconsistent. It isn't reality. It isn't the truth. I mean, I'm not opposed. I'm opposed to almost any form of impediments on freedom of speech. I think people should, you should have good and bad out there and let everyone make their decisions.
Yeah. So if we have a guest on the station here you agree or don't agree with or whatever, it's a good way to find out what their thought processes are.
Exactly. Let people talk.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for being with us. We'll have you next month.